Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. Eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. Welcome to my penultimate episode of Tier 1. All the albums I listened to the first 6 weeks of this year, we're summing them up, rounding them up, and give you little miniature reviews on all of them in the hopes of hopefully getting you all excited about them, and also to set the standard for everything we're listening to as we go throughout the year. So today we're starting off with Green Day's Warning. Green Day's Warning came after the slightly exploratory Nimrod and the kind of conceptual bombast of American Idiot. And by the metric of those two bookends, it seems almost modest in comparison, but that modesty is very calculated and very well thought through, because beneath its stripped down surface is a really calculated attempt to reconnect with the very roots of pop rock. The album's DNA goes surprisingly far back and doesn't really rely on the aggression of punk that their earlier albums did. Instead, Warning taps into the raw immediacy of first wave British pop. And we're talking about the Beatles, Love Me Do, She Saw Me Standing There, that era of British pop, when rock was still direct and relatively unadorned. And there are several markers, I think, that you can point to that would indicate that. The bass lines are unusually McCartney-esque. The drumming's very in the pocket, and for Trey Cool, relatively simple. And they really drive it home with the occasional harmonica solo. So in that sense, Green Day's mission statement still remains relatively intact. They're an American band copying a British band, which is copying American music. The loop continues, but now reaching before that late stage punk into the early, very foundations of rock and roll. The songs are concise, melodic, and immediately memorable. Say what you want to about Billy Joe and Green Day, but the guy can write a hook. The choruses arrive naturally, and the structures are tight, and the relational energy is immediately noticeable. My kids, within 30 seconds of listening to the first track, were singing along. Proof, I think, that the songwriting really still functions on a very immediate and almost fundamental level. At the same time, this album reflects a band that was kind of quietly experimenting with their own identity. Of course, anybody who was a fan of Green Day in the early days when they very first came out on Dookie, again, songwriting there was the thing that really pulled everybody in, myself included. I did not want to like Green Day when I first had them, but couldn't help it. They really drew me in. And many other people got drawn into that same incendiary songwriting. And some people kind of saw this willingness to experiment as a betrayal of their punk rock roots, maybe reading Ambition as commercial compromise, but instead it asks a subtler question. How many ways can a band reinvent their essential songwriting engine without exhausting it? The answer lies in restraint. While its predecessor maybe reached for some different edges of experimentation within that pop songwriting style, Warning returns to something a little more elemental. It's retro pop songwriting without nostalgia. By looking past punk and reaching back to the earliest roots of pop songwriting, Green Day revealed that their greatest strength was never attitude or aggression, it was melody.
Can't quite tell just what it means to me. Keep out of reach of children, don't you talk to stranger. Get your philosophy from above the sticker. Warning, live without warning. Until warning, live without warning. Without, alright.
Next up, I got Atarimatt, Happy Mayonnaise. The thing you got to catch to really appreciate the genius behind Happy Mayonnaise is that Atarimatt's main medium for music production is two cracked Atari 2600s, which kind of puts it in that category of chiptune music. But a lot of chiptune music that I've heard really focuses on the SNES and the kind of 8-bit sound of the 90s. To really mine this very specific sound of the 70s, I think is a unique take on the chiptune approach to making music. And for those of us that were there in the 70s with the joystick and the one red button, certainly those sounds are immediately recognizable. And it makes a level of nostalgia to the very foundations of what this music sounds like. Furthermore, there are other references to the past, I think, that deepen this nostalgia in a very unique way, because it constructs this past out of things that really didn't have too much to do with each other in real life. For example, the album cover is clearly inspired by Roger Dean. That's a 70s callback. But there are also several references in the titles of these songs to Tron. And Tron came out in 1982, way after the 2600 was out there and popular. And there are also kind of another couple of fun references to like Little Debbie snack cakes and things, just in the titles of the songs. And even though these things didn't ever actually truly coexist, Atarimatt's very unique way of kind of putting them all together in an album that is entirely instrumental and create this really unique pastiche world of nostalgia, I think is pretty smart, pretty ingenious, and also very playful. Never takes himself too terribly seriously. And understanding all this context, I think, is crucial to appreciating the genius behind the album, because superficially, just coming at it, the album kind of has a little bit of a grating feel, and that's inherent to the sound of the Atari 2600. It was never really meant to be a music-making machine. It's really more used for sound effects and the occasional, like, fanfare, but it's essentially a monophonic instrument. They could create more than one sound in it, but they had to do special tricks to make it work. It could never play a real triad, never really play a real chord. But Atarimatt is really quite brilliant about how he recombines these things, and even though the texture feels a little bit almost brutalist, it's actually very musical within that limited range. And certainly Atarimatt could have added contemporary production techniques, could have put drum machines on that are more contemporary, that would maybe smooth it out and make it a little more palatable. But the album is in some ways a real exercise in constraint, using that very limited palette and creating something uniquely musical and a sort of a love letter to those of us that were there at the time. Next up I got Switcheroo by Gelli. This is actually the third album by the artist Angel Abaya, but it's actually the debut for Gelli. Gelli is a character that Angel Abaya created for the sake of distancing herself from her past creative endeavors. She was starting to feel inhibited in the creative space that she was in and her own identity. So she created this, not only Gelli, but Gelli as sort of the harbinger of this larger concept called the Jelliverse that her music exists in. You have to imagine the Jelliverse is kind of like a psychedelic children's party, almost like you're going to go like watch Grimes, early Grimes, as a guest spot on Pee-wee's Playhouse, where everybody's kind of looking over at the adults in the room to make sure that they get it while they're singing to the children. The result is sort of this bright splash of what I call kind of girly astropop. It's defiantly feminine and defiantly creative in the most childlike sense. And it's this childlike nature of the music that creates the duality of the album, because on the one hand, if you listen lyrically to it, it's definitely aimed at some adult themes, while at the same time spreading out into very creative avenues of contemporary pop music. And like I kind of mentioned before, my first impression of this is like Grimes before she kind of jumped the shark on her very first album, Visions. That sort of carefree nature that album had is embedded here at the very core of Switcheroo. It's bright and it's surreal and it's joyfully eccentric, but it also represents an artist who's really reclaiming creative authority over her own identity. Finally, I got Ninajirichi's I Love My Computer. I Love My Computer approaches electronic music from a really kind of a surprisingly intimate angle, where it examines the relationship between Ninajirichi and her computer, not as like a tool, but an intimate companion for creativity. She's an Australian DJ, and this is her debut album, and it's a concept album that loosely explores what it means to grow up alongside machines that help us shape, create, and communicate, and even in a way understand ourselves. The album itself unmistakably sits within the sort of creative collective memory of early 2000s youth, right? There are very specific references in here to things that are vividly from that era. Talking about an iPod Touch in a Pikachu case with a little crack in it, or references to using GarageBand as a creative tool for musicality. All these references have a meaning to people that were raised in that era. And rather than viewing those items as with some sort of like technological distance and suspicion, I Love My Computer treats them as companions in self-discovery. And that framing distinguishes the album from sort of the cautionary tales of internet addiction that we talk about so much today. And while that distance is certainly there, there's also an alternative way that you can look at this, where there's this sort of blissful isolation that one can have and the self-discovery that they can experience through using technology as a collaborator and a mirror. In a way, the album kind of comes off as a coming-of-age story told through a relationship between humans and circuits and computers and software. Musically, the album fits pretty squarely in the realm of contemporary EDM. It's certainly the most EDM-style album that I have in Tier 1. And as such, it reminds me a lot of the early aughts. At the time, I was listening to things like Deadmau5 and listening to a lot of Daft Punk. And that defined a lot of the musical landscape of the 2010s. But the conceptual framework that we're looking at this album from is definitely told from a more contemporary perspective, I think, looking back fondly at that time. Now, what I think makes I Love My Computer so compelling is really its an emotional sincerity. Beneath the surface of pulsing beats and digital textures lies a surprisingly tender portrait of adolescence growing up in that environment, when technology was really coming into its own and showing the possibility of self-reflection through the media. And for many listeners who grew up in that era, computers weren't just a machine. They were the gateway for creativity, community, and self-expression. Ninajirichi really leans into that experience, making an album that's generationally very specific, but also widely relatable. It captures that strange warmth of growing up with technology in front of a screen, but realizing that that machine that's helping you make music is also helping you understand who you are.
It sounds like a good touch, yellow Pikachu kiss. FL Studio freak down the end, that's such history. Hidden underneath my pillow, 'cause I should be safe. I'm keeping it a secret. It sounds like I wrote a song that nobody knows, and I had it in a post when I was 12 years old. I didn't know it would score the 64 plus home. Turn a Monday to a memory and change my world. It sounds like
And that's all I got for you guys this time around. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe, share it out with your friends. Also follow me over on Spotify. I've got a big track listing that has representative tracks up from all of these albums. Please go check that out. And if you want to be part of deciding which of these albums and the ones that we're going to be listening to going forward throughout the year will be the best ones and make my top 20 at the end of the year, please sign up for my Patreon below. And until I see you next time, I'll catch you guys on the flip side.